The title of the show is called Liberty and Orders. All of the work kind of, in some way, references this notion of personal responsibility and power. The irony is I've actually lived in the U.S. for most of my life. I left Jamaica when I was 12. But it wasn't until last year when I decided to become a U.S. citizen. I actually started thinking about the role of this citizen. And it kind of echoed, might be naturalized, echoed in questions regarding several of the works.
His personal politics is very clear and strong, and I appreciate that in the work.
It's clear that he's kind of thinking about the ideas of home and homeland and an adopted home, let's say, because he was born elsewhere and he became a citizen here. And what does that mean in terms of home and in terms of the environment of the country that he's now living in?
TP Rainbow is the title of this piece, and it's a play on the word TP as a kind of Native American abode, but it's actually a tactical platform. And rainbow is not the rainbow of light and moisture, but rainbow in rain, R-E-I-G-N, as in rule, and bow, as in being on your knees to something. So the piece kind of, for me, is about this notion of authority and our regard for it and our suspicion of it. What generated the ideas in the piece was that in my neighborhood, I live around the corner from a project, and whenever there is any kind of issue with the project, the police department puts this a version of this tactical platform out front. And who knows what they're doing, but it'll be up high and they'll be there for hours. And I really got intrigued with the mystery of what this thing represented and how alien it became in that context of the neighborhood. So for me, it became this strange tower of power, and I wanted to talk about finding a way to sort of hold on to the coattail of this tower of power and introduce other narratives. So, for instance, the zipper, this kind of zipper Rapunzel moment coming out of the window of this platform is basically a moment of anxiety because the zipper is pant zippers and there's hair caught in each zipper. And then there's this little character, I call him Cornell, that has like a big afro, and he's like this. He's kind of the witness to the entire interaction of this moment of the zipper coming down. But he's also the witness. He's the spectator. He's us. He's us as well. And he's kind of an intellectual, mischievous individual that I wanted to bring into the conversation. And one last thing that you see on the back wall is that from this platform, from this tactical platform, are these red laser lights. So it's this notion of surveillance, the notion of maybe danger that's juxtaposed with a more kind of playful, mischievous narrative.
I think Nari never takes for granted where he is. He never takes for granted the city that we live in, the things that are valuable, but also more importantly, the things that are discarded because they're seen as having lost their value.
So people take it for granted and it becomes normalized in that context, but I always thought of how can this thing that's so familiar and maybe even so temporary become a symbol of authority. So this piece is called Homeland, Sweet Homeland. I started working a lot with this idea of the Miranda rights and finding a way to represent it to an audience in a way that they would always see it as something that you'd see in a home that's like home sweet home, like something very practical, something very pleasant. But then this is also turned into something a little bit more maybe mischievous.
He's from Jamaica, and I think there's something about coming from a poor country or a poor space where resourcefulness and the kind of ingenuity that comes from the fact that you don't have excess, you're not an economy that's making more than it can possibly use. You tend to sort of recycle things and reuse things, and people are just way more inventive about how to do that.
And he's taking the material from one place and bringing it to another place, but in a lot of them, there's still the essence of the material is still existing in the piece. He doesn't just transform the material.
With Nari's work, they're objects that we understand in our everyday lives and everyday use, and so he's kind of hooked you in already, and so pulling you in. And take a closer look, listen a little more closely to what I have to say.
One thing I noticed in this show, I mean, he does obviously return to certain kinds of objects over and over, like the shoes, but it's really incredible to see, for example, that phrase almost painted with the shoelaces. He makes a calligraphy out of the shoelaces, which is something you wouldn't have even thought possible somehow.
It's not like if he finds something and he has an idea of what to do with it, you know, it's just like he just find it and then he bring it back in his studio and then he digests. It's like eating it and digesting it, you know, for quite a while, and until he find another element who's indeed going to fit with that thinking process and not this one.
For me, this piece is about this notion of rebirth, because I'm taking the ashes from the flag that's been incinerated, and I asked an individual who I'll talk a little bit about. His name is Franco the Great. And he does this thing where he will take something that's burnt, like ashes of a loved one or a pet, and then he will paint a portrait of them. I really got intrigued with that idea of taking material and reinvesting it with energy for the viewer. So I asked him to take the ashes from the burned flag and repaint the American flag with those ashes. So it's really about this idea of possibilities, creativity, and rebirth.
It's like one of these kind of scientific, archaeological kind of person who, you know, dig the ground and find things, except he doesn't have to dig, it's all there, you know, but he would dig with his eyes to just look and see. And
I collect a lot of things that I find on the street, and I had it in my basement for about 8 years. And it just so happened that while I was working on this piece, and I got the flag back from this person who painted it, somehow it just made sense to put these two things together.
his studio is pretty large. It's like, it's outside, it's the streets, it's his neighborhood. So that's the kind of, I would call it the storage place, where he has his things, you know, and then he brings it in a studio in order to just try to find the alchemy between the different things, you know, in order to do his pieces.
He sort of like, stresses things into sort of forced relationships, and eventually there's these wonderful marriages that come out of them, that they're the objects that he makes, that you would never normally think things like that would work well together, but it does in Nari's work, because I think he understands how to do that.
The title for this piece is called Blank Scale. And basically, it's made out of blankets and clothes. And I started out with this idea of, you've heard this term, justice is blind. So I was thinking about this idea of covering something, negating something, and how to choose a material that would cover something, but also present some level of comfort. So the blanket for me is this reference to comfort, but also concealment.
Having a show in a gallery, you know, he needs to like redistribute the space where everything came from. That's what I think. You know, it's not just a question of a wall. It's not a question of, you know, one corner in one room, you know. It's a relationship between the pieces, the floor, the wall, the ceiling, the light, no light. It's just proportions and space somehow. He needs it all.